When you start your day scraping windows, and your plan is to do a 125-kilometer overnight race in a planing sport boat, you know there is going to be a story to tell and lessons to learn. Thankfully the sun was out and it was beginning to warm up. Gladiator is a Cheetah 30, designed by Bob Amos and built by Corsair Marine. She only weighs about a ton, or 2,200 pounds bare, with nearly half of that is lead in the bottom of the retractable 7-foot keel. It's really a large dinghy, and that light weight requires all the crew on the rail to provide righting moment to sail upwind. The course is the 68 nautical mile, or 125 kilometer, Blackline Patos Island long course, which takes you back and forth across the Canada-US border, through one of the busiest shipping lanes in North America, and has extreme currents that can spin your boat right around.
Looks like the Kraken's coming for us, boys. Hope you got your religions in order.
Gladiator lives on a floating hydro hoist, which is a very convenient way to keep the bottom clean. The 7-foot keel is also retractable, which makes Gladiator trailerable, a rare and nice feature for a keelboat. The first step to sailing her is to let the air out of the hydro hoist, starting with the stern, then the bow, until the bunks are fully submerged. The keel is so long it sticks out of the cabin top when retracted. We use an electric drill to turn the lowering screw. Then we lower the scaffold while the keel is held by the stainless retainer. Then we remove the retainer, then lower the keel the rest of the way. There's only enough room inside for a few bags and some sails. It's going to be a cold night, but thankfully there's no rain in the forecast. We motor past the race committee to check in. We also check out some of our competitors, almost all of which are in larger, heavier boats. In typical Sydney fashion, the winds were very light at the start, and so was the forecast, which led to our first big mistake of the race. We didn't rig our reefing lines. Instead, we need more horsepower, so we extend the bowsprit and launch the Code Zero spinnaker.
Fun if nothing else, right?
Yeah.
And here we go.
Our next mistake was rigging for an outside jibe, so we had to re-lead the sheets. At least we're moving now. Not a great start, but we're off. But the wind quickly built, and we found ourselves overpowered, but without reefing lines rigged. And we're being threatened by some of our competitors. We just didn't have enough righting moment to keep the boat upright with our tiny keel. And we were sailing with one less person than we normally sail with in a breeze, which severely impacted our upwind performance. Thankfully, we were able to rig the reefing lines and put in a reef, which really helped settle the boat. The short waves were also really slowing us down, and it was discouraging to see our competitors starting to come back with spinnakers. And while we didn't catch it on camera, one of our crew members found themselves up to their waist in seawater on the low side of the boat after we temporarily lost control during a bad tack. Thankfully he didn't fall overboard, but this is a long race, and we were very concerned that his wet clothing would create a serious hypothermia risk as temperatures were forecast to drop near freezing at night. After that horrible upwind performance, we were thrilled to finally reach the smelly, poop-covered buoy at Beaumont Shoals, so we eased the sails and bore away downwind. We were disappointed to round the first mark as one of the last 5 boats, but thankfully this upwind leg was behind us and our wet crew member would finally have a chance to put on some dry clothing. But during that rough upwind leg, a few inches of seawater had found its way into the bottom of the boat. Some of the crew had their spare clothing in dry bags, but some didn't, and the clothes that weren't were now soaking wet. In retrospect, everybody should have used dry bags. This is a good time to thank our sponsor Bluetti for the brand new AC60 we had on board for power. It has an IP65 rating for water resistance, which means it can tolerate being doused in water. It has a 400 watt-hour battery and can output 10 amps through the cigarette lighter, which is how we're powering Gladiator's lights and instruments. There's an inductive phone charger on top, plus USB A and C outlets, and a 600 watt AC inverter. You can charge the AC60 at a whopping 400 to 500 watts using AC power for an 80% charge in less than an hour. There is also a built-in solar charge controller, and you can charge from a cigarette lighter in your car. Finally, this is the smallest Bluetti power station that can be connected to external B80 power modules for up to 2,000 watt-hours of total power. Unfortunately, our B80 didn't arrive in time, but it would have been really useful, as you'll see later in the video. We shook out the reef and launched our spinnaker and began to make up some of the ground we had lost to the other boats. This is what sport boat sailing is all about, gliding along on top of the water at 10 to 15 knots.
You know, those spinnakers, is it my imagination or they don't look as small?
We managed to dry out the bottom of the boat thanks to the sponge and bucket we had on board. And our wet crew member was also able to take off his wet gear and dry it out in the sun and breeze. We were making really good progress catching and passing other boats. And now that everything is drying out, we hit a wave and drench it all again.
Okay, you guys gotta shut the companionway, right?
You really want to be sure you're kneeling to pee, because you don't want to fall overboard in these conditions. Glorious downwind sailing like this is what we get in return for that miserable upwind leg. For more than an hour and a half, we got to enjoy complete downwind bliss. It would have been easy for us to duck home at this point, but unlike 90 minutes ago, that was the last thing on our minds. As we approached Turn Point, about halfway through the course, we knew the sleigh ride was over, but instead of being at the back, we were now about halfway through the fleet. The wind came forward and we switched back to jib. At least this was much more pleasant than our previous upwind leg, because the wind was coming over some islands, so the waves were very small. We also brought out some more wet gear to dry in the sun and gentle breeze. The wind went aft again, and we were able to extend the bowsprit and relaunch the spinnaker.
Okay, pre-feed tack.
Thankfully, it wasn't very windy,
Okay.
or he could have been pulled overboard by that sheet. Sometimes with more breeze, we leave the jib up, as described in this other video, but it's pretty light right now, so we'll take it down. Not quite as exciting as the last downwind leg, but still moving nicely. And certainly well into the middle of the fleet. Starting to see some evidence of nasty currents on the water, and some foreshadowing of what's to come. It's amazing how well we can move in such little wind. We had good pressure for the first part of our Patos Island rounding. You can see the island in the background. We chose to round in a counterclockwise direction in order to stay in as much wind as possible through the first part of the rounding, before going into the lee of the island. It appeared to work, as we caught the majority of the fleet, which was very encouraging. The wind became very light and moved forward in the lee of Patos Island, so we had to drop the spinnaker. But as the lighthouse came into view on the other side of the island, we found out firsthand why the fleet had made such poor progress. The adverse current turned out to be much stronger than expected.
5.2 is the SOG and 4.6 is the VMG. Looks like the Kraken's coming for us, boys. Hope you got your religions in order.
We were sailing at 4 knots through the water, but a powerful 4-knot current was going the other way, so we were not making any progress whatsoever. It was little consolation that other boats were having the exact same problem. We rounded at the point of maximum flood and had that lighthouse on our beam for the next 90 minutes, when we finally began to make some progress as the current weakened. We bundled up and sailed into the night, expecting temperatures to drop to near freezing. In the dark, we made slow but steady progress back towards Sydney. But then, between Moresby and South Pender Island, everything went black. The moon had just set, and our lights and instruments went dark. There were boats all around us, so it was somewhat problematic that nobody could see us. Our glorious brand new Bluetti AC-60 was empty. We had tested the current draw the day before and expected its 400 watt-hours to be sufficient for the duration of the race. But it turns out our VHF radio had drawn more energy than during the test, as there had been quite a bit of chatter on the race channel during the day, versus nothing the day before. And ironically, the B80 expansion battery pack that Bluetti was also sending didn't arrive until the day after the race. We really could have used those additional 800 watt-hours. So we connected our emergency lead-acid battery, and our lights and instruments came back on to guide us home. But after the lights came back on, we were slow, and we were passed by a number of slower boats on the way to the finish line. The culprit made itself known on the boat hoist the next day, a huge piece of bull kelp. We had picked this up around the time our lights went out. We did notice a slowdown, and even tried using our kelp cutter, and while it did cut something, it was only a fraction of the way through this monster. So it didn't shed it, and we couldn't see it in the dark. So while we didn't get a good result in the race, we did get the best spinnaker run of the year so far. Remember to leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and watch this next video.